So I just got back to my home in Southern California and I forgot to bring my plants with me. I have none of my plants here right now and I feel weird. It makes me feel very weird. So if you're a subscriber and you're like, oh, she's back in her old place, but it looks different, something is off, what is it? That's what it is. But no matter, we still have a really good topic for today's video, and I also have an excellent on-theme shirt for today. Allow me. Very on brand, I would say. So for today's video, coming to you by popular demand, is a comparison of the 1951 The Thing from Another World and John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. I recently did a comparison of House of Wax from 1953 and 2005. That was a really fun video. You guys really liked it. So I was like, yeah, let's do another. Why not? I'll begin with kind of a brief overview of the history of each of the movies, and then I'll go into a very brief plot synopsis so you know what's up with each movie if you haven't seen either of them. Then from there, I'll kind of talk about some of the plot differences from each of the movies, and after that we will get into the characters. So I'll go over the main characters from each of the movies and compare them. Then we'll be talking about all of the special effects, which, as you would imagine from The Thing from 1982, there is a lot to cover. And then finally we'll be topping it off with all of the major themes from each of the movies. Basically, like, what was each movie trying to say? Was there some underlying social commentary? What kind of fear were we trying to express with each movie? And then I'll wrap it up with an overall comparison, and I'll try to decide which one I like more. So grab a snack, grab a drink, buckle up. Okay, so starting off with The Thing from Another World from 1951. This was directed by Christian Nyby, although there does seem to be some debate among the cast and crew because a lot of them seem to think that Howard Hawks was the actual director of the movie. Apparently he called a lot of the shots. This was estimated to have made about $1.95 million at the box office, so a pretty big movie. I think it actually cracked top 50 of that year of one of the highest earning movies. Directors Ridley Scott, who made Alien, Tobe Hooper, and John Carpenter all have cited this movie as a key influential film in their lives, and Carpenter was the one to actually take it upon himself to make an adaptation of it. But you know that, you're here. In fact, scenes from this movie are actually featured in Halloween from 1978, when Laurie Strode and the kids are just hanging out in the house, they're watching a movie on the TV, and this is that movie. Apparently, Howard Hawks had asked the US military for their assistance in making this movie, but they turned him down, because apparently they felt that this would compromise the US government's official stance that UFOs did not exist. They were like, oh god, if we make this movie, they're gonna think that we think aliens are real, and we can't have that for some reason. That's kind of suspicious. I feel like that's exactly the thing that a government would do if they actually did believe in aliens. James Arness, who played the Thing, reportedly found his role so embarrassing that he didn't even go to the premiere, which is kind of sad. And then the last bit of trivia that I wanted to share is apparently at the South Pole Telescope Station, they have a tradition every winter of watching this movie as well as the other two adaptations, and they do this on the very first night after the departure of the final plane of the season, which to me sounds like a terrible idea, but I guess it really is the proper time and place to be watching it, so what do I know? Okay, now moving on to John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. Apparently, with this movie, there is a tradition in British Antarctic research stations to watch this as part of their midwinter feast and their celebration that's held every June 21st. John Carpenter has stated that of all of his films, this is his personal favorite. It reportedly made about $19.6 million in the box office, but it initially was not considered to be a success. Most horror fans probably know this, but if you're new to horror history, then there is a lot of information about this that I'd actually like to share. According to Carpenter, he takes all of his failed movies pretty hard, but this one was for him by far the worst. Critics said things like, it was too phony looking to be disgusting, it qualifies only as instant junk. They said it's hard to tell who's being attacked and it's hard to care. Famous film critic Roger Ebert has even said that he was disappointed by the superficial characterizations and the implausible behavior, and he dismissed the movie as nothing more than an alien knockoff. And the director of The Thing from Another World, Christian Nyby, even also publicly denounced the movie. He said, if you want blood, go to the slaughterhouse. All in all, it's a terrific commercial for J&B's Scotch. And in response to the commercial bombing of this movie, the studio actually canceled their multi-movie deal that they had made with Carpenter, and Carpenter has said that he thinks his career would look a lot differently if this movie was seen as successful from the get. But then this movie definitely enjoyed a very strong cult following when it was released at home, and then after that there was a mass critical critical reevaluation of the movie. The producers think that this movie was not initially successful because perhaps E.T. had just been released. It came out 7 weeks prior to The Thing, so it was very fresh in people's minds, and so they think that people maybe wanted to see a more benign alien. But who knows? You know, it hardly matters now because that movie is seen as one of the best horror films of all time. I think that's so interesting. It's something that I want to look more into because it's like, okay, once the public at home was enjoying it, maybe it was just because of the entertainment value, who knows? But then critics were like, oh yeah, wait, it's actually brilliant. I'm not saying that it's not brilliant. I'm just like, why was that energy not there initially? Was it really because of the E.T. thing? I don't know. It just sounds weird to me. So we'll actually have a little bit more trivia once I get into all of my topics. But for now, we're going to shift gears and start getting into some of the different sections of this video, starting with the plot. So just to give you a brief rundown of what happens in each movie. In The Thing from Another World, scientist Dr. Carrington reports a UFO near his North Pole research base, and the Air Force sends in a team under Captain Patrick Hendry to investigate. What they find is a wrecked spaceship and a humanoid creature frozen in the ice. They bring their discovery back to the base, but Carrington and Hendry disagree over what to do with it. Meanwhile, the creature is accidentally thawed and begins wreaking havoc. Then in John Carpenter's The Thing, in remote Antarctica, a group of American research scientists are disturbed at their base camp by a helicopter shooting at a sled dog. When they take in the dog, it brutally attacks both human beings and canines in the camp, and they discover that the beast can assume the shape of its victims. A resourceful helicopter pilot and the camp doctor lead the camp crew in a desperate, gory battle against the vicious creature before it picks them all off one by one. I will be getting into quite a few spoilers in this video, so I'm hoping that you've seen both of these movies. This is one of the cases where I don't necessarily feel like you have to have seen the original, because I'll get into some of the plot differences, but the movies are, for the most part, kind of similar. Whereas with The House of Wax, with that comparison, you absolutely had to have seen both of those movies because they're so different from one another. This one, I think you can get away with just having watched the remake. But there are still a lot of differences in the plot, namely how I think they build the tension. The dogs are a very minimal little side part of the plot in The Thing from Another World. There's a dog that comes into play, but it's only when its body is discovered after the Thing cancels its life subscription and drains it of its blood. Also, of course, in the original, the Thing does not imitate other people. It's just this basic-ass Frankenstein that has apparently evolved from plants. Its DNA is very similar to that of a vegetable, and it's just running around and killing people, basically. John Carpenter, I feel like, is more masterful at eliciting emotion with his storytelling. In the very opening scene, you see a Norwegian helicopter shooting at a dog that is running across the snow, and you're like, what? Do tell me more. And he utilizes the dogs to continue to build tension until we have our first inciting incident when one of the dogs basically explodes into a tentacle monster. They also make it more of a point to let the audience know that they are very isolated.
Get a hold of anybody. We gotta report this mess.
Look, I haven't been able to reach shit in 2 weeks. I doubt if anybody's talked to anybody on this entire continent, and you want me to reach somebody.
Like, they really hammer it home very early on that these people are alone and there isn't going to be help coming for the rest of the movie. And then, of course, with the imitation aspect of the alien in this movie, there is a lot more room for paranoia to build between the characters, and that's personally one of my favorite parts of the movie. So not only does it have these insane monster effects with one of the craziest aliens ever to be seen on film, but it's also a really fascinating study on character relationships, and I'll actually be getting more into that when I talk about the themes of the movies. I think overall with the remake, something that's important to note is that it holds up so well upon a rewatch. There's more to notice every single time that you watch it when you already know what's gonna happen, because the beginning of the movie with the dog running around and it being shot at and everything, it actually tells you everything that you need to know about the movie. It's so weird watching it in hindsight, and I think it's just a movie that gets better on every single viewing. I think my favorite plot difference is definitely the fact that all of these men are now trying to figure out which of them is human. I think John Carpenter saw the paranoia that was building in the original and he was like, I can do this times 10. Johnny, love you for that. But we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to move on now to my characters portion of the video. In The Thing from Another World, honestly, I couldn't even really remember the characters' names. I would say the most important characters are Ned Scott, Captain Pat Hendry, and the scientist, especially Dr. Arthur Carrington. I can't lie, I don't feel like any of the characters were super strong. And I just feel like in general, most 1950s movies are not known for their strong characters unless they star Vincent Price. So honestly, not too much to say there. In The Thing, there's also not really much to say from character to character. They're all pretty similar. Aside from the fact that Kurt Russell obviously does stand out. I love his character. He definitely had that really good action movie kind of leader energy, a little bit Indiana Jones-ish, if you will. But aside from that, as I mentioned earlier, the thing that I noticed with the characters most was their relationships, the way that paranoia was building between them. And to me, that made the dialogue and the actions of all the characters a lot more realistic. In the remake, these people felt extremely real to me, and it helps with my suspension of disbelief a lot. I get a lot more sucked into John Carpenter's The Thing. But again, there's more to discuss there with the theme portion of the video, so we're actually going to move on now to the effects. I feel like this is probably what a lot of you guys were waiting for, huh? So the makeup artist for The Thing from Another World was named Lee Greenway. Apparently, after trying to do the makeup on James Arness for several months, Howard Hawks was so frustrated and just not happy with any of the makeup that they eventually just sort of landed on giving him a kind of Frankenstein-esque mask. Or I guess not really a mask, it was more of like a headpiece. And because of this, close-ups of the alien were actually removed from the movie. It was felt that the headpiece and the makeup would not hold up under close scrutiny. And that's saying something for 1951. But the lack of close-ups could be said to have given the creature more of a mysterious quality to him. All in all, there's not too much to be said for the effects of The Thing. It is not as effect heavy. I do think that when they're conducting science, when they're, testing the DNA of the creature's arm and everything, it all holds up. It looks really good. There's just nothing that really stands out in my opinion, because we just get such vague images of this creature and he really does just kind of look like Frankenstein. And we all know that I'm gonna have a lot more to say about John Carpenter's The Thing because of the practical effects, so let's just jump to that. Special effects designer Rob Bottin actually was the head of a team of about 40 people for all of the effects of this movie. Also, he was apparently so dedicated to his work that he became very ill with exhaustion, double pneumonia, and a bleeding ulcer for which he had to be hospitalized. I'm not blaming anybody in particular, it's just the exploitative nature of Hollywood is very evident with this story. Anyways, the first thing I need to talk about is actually from the very opening scene of this movie with the opening title. To create this effect, an animation cell with The Thing written on it was actually placed behind a smoke-filled fish tank which was covered with a plastic garbage bag. Then the bag was ignited, which created the effect of the title burning onto the screen. I don't know how I thought that they did that, but it wasn't that way. But some more fun facts. The tentacles that Clark sees in the dog cage are whips that are being maneuvered by Rob Bottin. They also used real animal organs for the dissection scene. Fun. This movie is not vegan, if that's something you cared about. Carpenter was also very adamant to make a monster movie where the alien was not played by somebody that was just obviously in a suit. This is apparently something that bothered him about Alien from 1979, which is surprising to me because whenever I watch that movie, sure, sometimes the alien might have some kind of humanish movements, but it never has taken me out of the movie. It's never bothered me. They also used a real flamethrower in this movie, and it was operated by Kurt Russell. One day after shooting a scene, he thought it would be really funny if he pretended that he got burned, so he put some bandages on his head and he went up to John Carpenter like that. And for my last bit of trivia on the effects from The Thing, the final confrontation with The Thing required the assistance of 50 technicians. 50. I mean, I'm not surprised. It's like this massive multi-limbed giant thing. But still, just it's hard to wrap your mind around the scale of doing effects like that. Which when we look at this stuff, I feel like the moments where the thing is still, where the camera is kind of just panning over it and it's almost more like a sculpture than a moving piece, I think that's when it works at its best. Whenever there's a lot of movement, like all the tentacles and stuff like that, it doesn't look super believable in my opinion, but I think just the artistry of it all is why it remains so captivating to me. And of course I have to say, the effects are much more preferable in the remake. Another small part of the topic of the effects is the production design. I just think, I don't know, effects, all the design, it all kind of lumps together. The Thing from Another World was partially filmed in Glacier National Park and at a Los Angeles ice storage plant. And in my opinion, while this might not be as transportive as the remake, I still think they do a pretty damn good job. It still definitely has an isolating feel, the snow looks pretty believable, but then we have John Carpenter's The Thing. Apparently to give the illusion of icy Antarctic conditions, interior sets on the Los Angeles sound stages were refrigerated down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is while it was well over 100 degrees outside. outside in Los Angeles. And these sets, I mean, in my opinion, I think that they are incredible. I definitely felt like I was in the Antarctic the entire time. It had a very isolating feel to it. So while with the original, you can kind of get a feel for when you're on a set, I mean, it's still relatively transportive. With John Carpenter's The Thing, I mean, you're there. Moving on to the last topic of today's video, and that would be discussing the different themes from each of these movies. Back in 1951, one of the biggest fears that people had was kind of this ever-present threat of nuclear war. The final line of dialogue in this movie is, "Keep watching the skies," and this became a very iconic quote.
I bring you a warning. Tell the world. Tell this to everybody wherever they are. Watch the skies. Everywhere. Keep looking. Keep watching the skies.
This quote was considered very emblematic of the sort of sci-fi 50s era of the time, and it's also on theme for the flying saucer hysteria of the time. For some reason in the 50s, people were very scared of aliens. There was also the Red Scare, and there was a genuinely real fear of a nuclear war breaking out, and this line has been modified and reused in countless TV shows, movies, you know, everything. Also in the movie, the men were given strict orders by the military not to kill the thing. They were meant to capture it so they could study it, but all of the men were like, no. It was an odd time where I think people at the time might have been questioning the military because, you know, after all of that non-stop war, maybe they were questioning their allegiance to the flag, if you know what I mean. But another very persistent theme of the movie was evolution. As they discover, the thing has mutated in a very human-like way, but not from a fish, from a plant. So he essentially has the genetic makeup of a vegetable, and the scientist in this movie is like, yes, and this makes him superior to us, actually. That is still unclear to me why, except for the fact that he survives off of blood. So anyways, my point with that, at this point, not everyone was cool with evolution. People still very firmly clung to their belief in the Bible, and they didn't accept anything outside of that. Religion was a much more prevalent force in society at that time, and so they almost used evolution as like a horror element in this movie. Like, oh, you wanna believe in evolution? Well, what about giant vegetable man drinking blood, What then? And the scientist is framed as slightly mad because I think initially it was him that was kind of on board with, like, not killing it.
Listen, I'm your friend. Look, I have no weapons. You're wiser than anything on Earth. I'm not your enemy. I'm a scientist. I'm a scientist who's trying.
He wanted to study it and study the evolution of it, and as a modern audience member, I think we definitely sympathize with him a little bit more. Moving on to the themes from John Carpenter's The Thing, though, there is also a lot to unpack here. Part of the fear with this movie came due to the very unfortunate AIDS epidemic of the time. The idea that you couldn't tell who was infected just by looking at them, I'm sure was a concept that was not lost on John Carpenter at the time. In that context, it's almost kind of sad how much that might have influenced the paranoia that came about in The Thing. Coming back to the character relationships, we don't really get any time to establish the relationships these men have with each other before, you know, the dog runs up to the base at the very beginning of the movie. But it's clear that they're very familiar with one another. They're a very small crew working in a very isolated place. There are also no women in sight, so like I'm assuming the brotherhood there was probably pretty strong. And then how quickly their paranoia had them turning on one another to the point of strapping people down to chairs and drawing and burning their blood. This definitely was shedding a light on individualism as well, which is a very common trait shared amongst many Americans especially. We're always looking out for number one. And kind of regardless of the fact that all of them had to work together, you did see a couple of them sort of branching off and just working in their own self-interest. And then there's also that added layer on top of it of the fact that if the thing was imitating them really well, it too would also think that it was a human, and it too would also act in self-defense in that way. So because of that, if it's your first viewing of the thing, you truly don't know who is who. It's really not until the blood test that that becomes clear. But for a thematic kind of overall comparison of the movies, I think that is where they differ the most, that and the practical effects. And to try to decide overall which movie I like more, I think again it would be too hard for me. I really love both of them. I think with the original, I just have more of a nostalgic connection to it. It's one that my grandma grandpa showed to me when I was really young. But John Carpenter's The Thing definitely has a lot more entertainment value. It keeps me a lot more consistently engaged. The original is a bit slower. There's a little bit less action with The Thing, less effects. There is a lot more of just kind of men standing around talking to each other. And in either movie, I don't feel like the characters are super memorable, except for my boy Kurt. He does have a standout performance. I mean, that's just my opinion though. I don't feel as strongly about John Carpenter's The Thing as much of its cult following does. I'm sure that you guys would have a lot more to say about the characters of the movie, but I've seen the movie I think 3 or 4 times at this point, and I still really couldn't tell you any of the characters' names, to be honest. I just remember my boy. My Kurt. And that's not to say that the other performances weren't good, because they were all good. I think that's obviously like one of the better things about the remake is how good the performances were. And as I mentioned, they felt very realistic, and it helped me to suspend my disbelief a lot more. But yeah, I can't really say that I prefer the characters themselves from either of the movies. And then of course the remake for the win with the practical effects, you know, what else am I gonna say? Thematically, I think that both movies are incredibly dense. There is a lot to unpack from both of them, especially when you take into account the current political environment at the time when these movies were released. So I can't say that I really have a preference with either of them. I don't think that either movie was particularly progressive. I think the original will just always have a special place in my heart, so it's really hard for me to say that I prefer the remake, but I do think that the remake is a lot more rewatchable, because in terms of entertainment value, I think that the remake is just obviously the better choice, but that is all of course subjective. And speaking of, I would love to know your opinion. Definitely drop that down below, which movie you prefer. I'm pretty sure I know which one it is though, but maybe you'll surprise me. I feel like this video was a lot more trivia based and had a lot less of my commentary. I'm sorry about that. My House of Wax comparison video had a little bit more to joke about and stuff, but both of these movies just happen to be very serious. They're also both very highly critically acclaimed at this point. With House of Wax, you had the remake in 2005 that was just ridiculous. So maybe let me know if in the future I should center these on movies that are more like outlandishly different, like House of Wax. But as I mentioned, this one was highly requested, so let me know what I should do next. I'm gonna be doing my top 10 movies of the 1960s soon, so I was thinking about doing a Psycho comparison. I was also thinking about doing a 13 Ghosts comparison. That would be very in line with my House of Wax video as well, because the remake came out in, what, like 2001 or something? So let me know what you want to see down below, and if you're new here, I do hope that you click subscribe. I hope you click the notification bell, the little like button, because that will let me know if you want to see more of these remake comparison videos. Other than that, all my social media is down below. My Patreon is down below if you'd like to support me. But other than that, have a great day, dude, or a great night, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Rock and roll. Goodbye.